All right, guys. Well, we have a treat today here on Bad Publicity. This is originally released as a Patreon exclusive. So if you are a generous donator to our Patreon fund, you will be able to, see deck guides like this early. So an early access to it. Um, so it's myself and Cory here. We've been working on. How long has it been, Cory, since we started?
It's it feels like it's been like a good solid month. I mean, honestly, since we did the State of Jinteki episode, actually, so longer than that,
Yeah.
because we've kind of always had it in the background, and then we started really focusing and ramping up testing on it.
Um. So, guys, we're gonna break down this industrial genomics deck that we're playing. I don't know. It's kind of got dubbed. I don't know if you guys have seen the bottom of the card. It says achieve the impossible. So this is archive the impossible. you know, uh, Corey, you once told me that you need a cheesy name to make it.
That's it. To get
To,
the feature. Uh,
yeah. So hopefully, this is cheesy enough to make an impact in the Netrunner community, and testing has shown that it can.
right.
So, history of the deck is two guys that love IG, and one day Corey said that he's working on something with IG, and he was playing around with an old list that got posted online. Chris Hinkey's from Worlds.
Mhm.
We're doing some adjustments, and he messaged me, and he says something along the lines of, "I think I'm just going to play Mother Goddess, so that way it will never change type." And I
Yeah.
thought about it for a bit, and we're like, that's pretty crazy, right? And that idea kind of got put on the back shelf, and we tried a, very low ice with some other different styles. And then out of nowhere, I just kind of scrapped all the ice in the deck and then put Mother Goddess in and played it a bit, and it was working really well. And I sent you a message back. I said, you know what, man? Back to the original idea. This is your joke turned into something good.
Yeah. It was hilarious, especially because like in our meta, because stealth rigs have become real big, and I kept hearing so many people go like, "Oh, you should cut out, man. You should take this out." And you're seeing all these things, and I'm just like, funny. Okay, cool. And I saw so many of these builds that are doing like three ice, but they're doing like a Yuguria, a Himitsubako, and something else. And I was just like, why don't you just play with ice with no types? Yeah. And it was one of those, yeah, it was just like a joke, and then we kind of played around with it, and turned out to be real good.
So we'll get into the deck list here in a second. But so what we have here is an IG list that it's been proven in the current store championship meta right now. Corey, you piloted it to a top four finish.
Yep.
I was a top eight, and we had a buddy of yours try it outside of you and me playing it,
He
and
went
he
did it was 27 player store champ. I think that's right. Maybe more, no, it was actually more than that. It was like 30 something, but he ended up third
yeah.
place.
So the results are there, and we're very proud of it. And today, whether if you're a Patreon getting early access to this, or you're waiting for its unreveal through the basic channels, let's
Yeah.
get into look at this list. All right, so of course this didn't copy over properly here.
The beauty of edits. Yeah. It's the good thing about this. You can clean it up.
All right, this is. I don't know why it's mucking with me right now. There we go. Okay, so this is our list here. And so, Cory, why don't you want to walk through the basic idea of this deck?
Sure. So it always plays for the kill. That's a big thing to keep in mind. You're not really trying to score agendas. The biggest plan is you're just trying to hide them and stall while you're setting up the kill on board. The deck has a really good way of grinding down and wearing the runner down through just like whittling them away through net damage and even meat damage. And then just to set up to where eventually you can just reach out and kill the runner. So it doesn't matter if they run or don't. Eventually you get a kill on board to where you can just take them out. And it kind of, you've been seeing some decks and stuff that use like the Hiro Ronin classic combo to set up and just reach out and do the kill on the runner. So a big thing about this deck is you have to be very, very patient, and you have to kind of keep to the plan and just work on like building up all of the threats, and then put a bunch of threats out to where the runner just has a hard time figuring out what a good decision is, like whether they should check this remote, whether they should check R&D, whether they should look at your hand, and you want to try to set everything up where it's punishing in some way.
So, a good tip is if somebody sits across from you at the table and says, "Hey, do you want to be the runner or the corporation first?" If you're playing this deck, it's a good idea to say Corp.
Yeah, that's true. Now, you probably get the stigma of IG decks always taking forever. Well, I can tell you that this deck is not that deck. When I played this at Titan, a variation at Titan Store Champs, I just missed the cut on that one. I ended at like 9th. But I was done. I was one of the first people done every round. Just because if you know how to play this deck, it's not you that's taking a long time to play it. It's the other person trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of analysis paralysis in some of the moves.
Right.
You just got to play with confidence, right? It's that part of Jinteki that you have to know, I'm going to put a trap out now, and I'm just going to do it with confidence and without hesitation. So that being said, it is a kill deck, and there is at no point in this game where you're really going to try and advance agendas for the score.
Right.
I mean, obviously, you can see my list. I include one copy of Blacklist. We'll talk about that. But if by chance you can see an exact opening and you can start scoring agendas, like, in that 1%, okay. But the main theme here and style of play is a total kill. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the card choices that we've put in here. This is an 8. First off, it's 54 cards.
Yes.
54 cards with 22 agenda points, and we're maxed out on influence. The card pool will go up to the first data pack right now in the Moonbad cycle.
Yep.
So 8 agendas. We're using 2 Fetals. We're using 3 Global Food and 3 Future Perfect. This agenda suite is basically just to keep the agenda density down to 8.
Yeah. And it's to make, you have the Global Foods in there, so they're not getting max value. The Fetals cause damage, potentially take out a kill, and tax the runner, and then Future Perfects to tax the runner. So again, you're already from the agenda suite, you can see frustration coming.
Right. Because it's not a score out deck, mm-hmm. There is tricks in play to hide agendas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to playstyle, but the Future Perfect plays into that because it has its built-in protection of the Psy game. So if there are times when you need to dump this into archives before you can Jackson it back in, at least if somebody does try and run it, you are protected with the Psy effects there, and even if they were able to snipe it from your hand before you're able to cycle it back into your deck, you are protected there
Yeah.
by the psi effects. Fetal is obviously there because, I mean, the 5-2 can be harsh sometimes in Jinteki styles, but we're not trying to score this. This is, you know, if they access it and want to steal it, they're just applying net damage. And it's one of the, you know, Jinteki's tried, tested, and true ambush agendas.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, you tax their
And
money and the cards in play.
and you're setting it up because you notice it's 8 agendas out of 54 cards, and if you can keep all your future perfects safe, then they have to find 4 of the other agendas, right, in order to win the game, because they'll need, you know, 3 foods, 1 fetal, or, you know, 2 fetals, 2 foods. Like, if you can bury and keep your future perfects away, you're making it to where it's hard to find these agendas in the deck, and they have to find a good number of them.
So most people will be looking at their screen right now, and normally after agendas, we're going to talk about assets, upgrades, operations, and ice is usually last. But you're probably wanting us to talk about this little section right here, this ice section that's marked other first. So we're not going to make you wait to the end. We're going to talk about that right now. And as we hinted off the top, we are using an extremely low ice count. 2 Mother Goddess and 1 Excalibur. This ice suite has proven surprisingly well against the use of Faust in the meta. Mother Goddess usually will gain a subtype of all other res dice, but our only other res dice is, surprisingly enough, a Mythic Grail that doesn't do anything to Mother Goddess. So this is where I was talking about before, that if you might be able to put a Blacklist out and a Mother Goddess behind it if they are not using an AI, or you can put a agenda behind the Mother Goddess if they're not using an AI, and obviously hopefully they don't have any bypass, you know, effects like inside jobs and stuff like that. But you can, you know, get a little greedy there. But the main goal is you want an Excalibur over your archives. That's our archives protection. So sometimes you have a kill set up and somebody will run archives and then start running your assets to decrease the value of the trash costs, that, you know, the IG ability. Excalibur, if they can't break that, you run through, they can't make another run this turn. They take whatever damage, hopefully you have your shocks sitting in there, and then you should have your kills set up that they're not able to trash through runs.
So, other cool things to talk about on the ice, and definitely in your placement, you kind of want to be mindful of what they're running. Like, it seems that Eater has really fallen off a lot as far as being like a staple breaker, but you always want to be careful that if you see or suspect Eater, be careful about installing over archives, because then you're going to give the runner a safe way to always flip your stuff over. So you may have to be a little better on your placement there. But a great thing about Mother Goddess is you can kind of figure out if they have an answer for it, right? If you're playing against Shaper and they for some reason have cut their Hockman and you install over R&D, like, if you can just turn off a whole server or, you know, area for them for the entire game, it's great, because then they have to figure out an answer. I know a lot of decks have been using like parasites, so that's really one of the better workarounds to get through these things. So just kind of be mindful of that. But you have other ways to punish parasites in the form of like hostile infrastructures and even like Blacklist for cheering up, you know, minimizing recursion. And the cool thing about was mentioned earlier is both of these pieces of ice are decently taxing for Faust. They're usually going to cost 2 cards to get through, which, going against Jinteki, where net damage is prevalent, that's great. That's like a good number of cards to make it where they're probably not going to run late in the turn. They're going to run early, and they're not going to be able to run over and over again. So it seems it's been great. It's been good in testing.
So on placement, you are running the shocks, the snares,
Hmm.
the fetals for damage. What you're going to want to do in general is not protect your R&D.
Yeah.
You pretty much want your Excalibur, like I said, like 80% of the time Excalibur is going to be on archives, and you're going to be double iced on HQ. Now, the double ice on HQ allows you to actually hide those agendas in your hand until you're able to archive, shuffle them back in your deck, or even if they can't get into your hand, just keep those in your hand, and you're now pacing the game at whatever
Hmm.
pace you need to set up your kill.
Yeah, and you may want to play that a little differently based on what you see, right? So let's say your hand is full of snares and like a fetal, then maybe, and if you're playing against Shaper that's doing a lot of RD multi-access, which is a mixed bag against Jinteki, right? Sometimes you're not exactly sad when they're seeing more than one card because it's more dangerous for them to hit multiple things that will do damage to them. But you can just kind of turn off what you think's going to flood you the most. So just kind of, you want to try to be flexible, but a lot of times, covering HQ and then putting something to punish R&D like a Hokusai or something up is the right play, or you can always reverse it based on what you're playing. So you usually want to Hokusai the opposite of where your ice goes, and just kind of make it where it's punishing going and anywhere they go.
So that's pretty much the ice. Corey, you didn't have anything else to say about that. I mean, there's not
No,
much to say about three cards,
right.
right?
I mean, and it's one of those that it is should be noted. I mean, you have three pieces of ice and 54 cards, so obviously you're not going to see them every game.
Mm-hmm.
But when they do show up, uh, it's fantastic, especially if you can see it early. Um, so just be aware that you can play the deck without having any ice whatsoever. But when it does show up, you need to kind of be paying attention of one, like what the runner's doing and where they've been consistently checking, and then just analyzing like, have I been seeing a lot of agendas to hand? Are all the agendas still in my deck? And what seems to be more beneficial for you to try to turn off for the runner?
So going into the assets, like I said, I use Blacklist, and Corey's experimented with it, but this is kind of like a flex spot where in his meta is more siphon heavy, and he's been using Sealed Vault. So I mean, it can be interchangeable. I see a lot of recursion and shaper play, so that's what
Yeah.
I'm falling back to um, a counter to that style. The other stuff to touch on here is, there's cards in here that are obviously standard. Okay, shock, you want to get them into your archives as quickly as possible so you can make it a threat to run. Obviously snares, turtlebacks, because you can see it's an asset deck. Turtlebacks are going to be able to gain you money. The other ones there are Melange, we're making our money somehow. So those are pretty much the staples for the assets. Now let's talk about how we're making up the kill. So the kill consists of cards like Ronin is a staple in this one,
Hmm.
Psychic Field. The hostile infrastructures are important. A Cerebral Overwriter.
Yeah.
This deck, Cory tried really hard, and he was able to pull it off. Is to get the contact or contract.
I
The
know. I lobbied for this really hard in testing, and it took till towards the end to finally make it in.
it was almost that last piece. There was a bunch of stuff that got pulled out. We were juggling the influence quite a lot, and we'll talk about that in some of the notable excludes. But some of the influence cards we were able to pull out that I wasn't in favor of before, and then he finally made some other adjustments and got it in there. And I think it works really well as another advanceable trap. And then obviously the chairman Hiro. So Corey, do you want to talk a little bit about those kill pieces?
Um, I mean, most of it's pretty standard, or you've probably seen in some way. I mean, it's not revolutionary with Ronin, Hero. Um, Big things to kind of keep in mind on other uses. So hostile infrastructure, right? Um, I mentioned a little earlier. It's pseudo like parasite bothersome, right? It'll help protect your assets, even if you load up, say like you Mushin or Ronin, and you're like maybe they'll come check it. But then if you have the threat of those hostiles, you res them when they're going to look at it. Then it's like, okay, do I trash this now? Most people will still do it, take the damage, and then like, okay, now it's going to be expensive to go and deal with a hostile because those things are not cheap to res. Um, and when we go into a little bit of play style against different runners, we'll kind of touch on how some of the other assets come into play. Um, but no, I mean that's all pretty standard stuff. Museum of Histories is another one, and of course that's like key for recursion and keeping these things going when they get trashed. Um, yeah,
And then obviously Jackson is been your friend in here. So the chairman
yeah,
Hero, most people like to play with two, but a last minute adjustment in a rendition before this got solidified, we were using one chairman Hero, and that's when we've boosted our hostile infrastructure. So I mean, if you feel like you really want to walk that line, you can play two chairman heroes, and you can cut a hostile, but we don't recommend that.
yeah. Especially like Wizard became a lot more prevalent, so it was actually easier for some of them to get through the chairman. And since you're trying to lower your agenda density, you effectively have two other potential agendas floating around on the deck, and so you want to minimize that. One other thing to bring up that I forgot to mention also about hostile, um, it's also fantastic if you have an apocalypse heavy meta, because nothing shuts that card down faster than them running the three centrals, and then at the end of that third run you res a hostile infrastructure, and then it's just like cool. Go ahead and play that card now, and then just watch them explode. So it's got some other protection because you are running that risk, right? You're not usually icing your centrals, so that's another key factor why that card was bumped up, because it helps if you're worried about that threat. So,
So in general, what the play style here to play with Chairman Hero is you're going to have him advanced out there, or sorry, not advanced, but like put out there. If you're really sneaky, you can advance him by the
Mushin, yeah,
Mushin him out there, and people might think it's a trap and leave him alone. But he's going to be out there. You're pretty much going to have some Ronins on charge. At the end of their turn, you res it up. Their hand size adjusts. Your turn starts, and then you pop some Ronins for the kill. So that's the general use of Mr. Hero.
yeah. And anytime you play like an asset heavy deck with a lot of traps and things like that, you have to always. It's super important for you to pay attention to the mannerisms and how the runner's playing. Are they checking everything you're putting down? Are how they're doing on money? Like and things like that to find out when the right time. Because Hero playing with one of you always have to be careful like when he drops down. And as mentioned, mooshing him is one of the safest ways to get him to the board. Because a lot of times they don't check advanced, face down cards, and it's very rare you see a drive by.
So that's our assets. That's how they break down here. And you can obviously, I'm not going to tell you the includes because the numbers are there. We use two Hokusai grids. These can be placed at a few random places, but mostly you're going to want to, because R&D is open, you're just going to want to keep it on R&D for when they're doing a couple pokes and checks in there.
And also with Hokusai and again hostile infrastructure, if you haven't get how important this card is, also can protect you from keyhole. Because obviously, again, if you're not going to protect R&D and you get an early keyhole, how am I keeping myself safe? Well, Hokusai's will help slow that down or make it where they have to deal with that before they can just keep keyholing you over and over again. And nothing's better than letting a successful keyhole run go off and then res hostiles and then watch the runner take a bunch of net damage because they're trashing the card.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the Hokusais. Then we use 10 operations. Diversified portfolio, since it's an asset-based deck, will get you your money. Neural EMPs, pretty standard in Jinteki
Let's go.
since core. The Mushins, because it's you gotta
It's like an econ
yeah,
card.
you gotta bluff your traps in there anyway. And then a new addition that came out in the last pack, along with Museum of History, was the Heritage Committee. This is a really cool card, and until you kind of play with it, it's kind of, I don't know, it might be, to the untrained eye, it looks not as
That's good.
special. Yeah,
Right.
it doesn't look like much. You're gonna draw three cards and put one back. But this card is the MVP sometimes,
Yeah.
right? It will, because you're not icing up R&D. You're creating draw, which if you're overdrawing your hand size, can just feed your archives for your ability.
Mm.
And you can just, most of the time people are going to think you're sliding a snare on the top of R&D for protection. So to stop them from doing that run that turn.
Yeah. And you could get sneaky too, because I mean, you said sometimes people get scared, right? You put that card on top, and it could be like as simple as a shock. I've even put like a Fetal on top sometimes, where it's been like, oh, whatever, you can, if you want to run, get it. But some of the reasons this could work is because you could put, if you sneak like a Fetal, for example, and you have a Museum of History out, if you can get it the last, then you're reshuffling the deck before you draw. So it's another way for you to kind of get stuff out of your hand. So, and again, a lot of this, like, do you think they'll run, plays off if you're paying attention to the mannerisms of the runner. But it's always awesome to kind of, if they're deep digging R&D, to Heritage Committee, and then sit a snare on top, and to just wait and see if they take that gamble and they're going to run R&D again.
Yeah, and that'll come with paying attention between their first couple turns, seeing what they're like when you put down remote servers. When you start building them out, if they're checking everything, then you know that their play style is to run and be more aggressive. So that's the deck as a whole there, and with touching on some of the surprises and things like that. Let's talk about the notable excludes, and obviously some of the notable excludes are the ice.
Yeah. Yes.
Some of the more common ones we've seen, a lot of people in IG play this Crick, because it's protection over the archives. A very taxing piece, really great piece of ice.
Absolutely.
But we just didn't feel it fits. Like, there's enough install from archives, or there's enough ways for us to get things out of archives in this deck now. And, well, basically the reason why none of this other stuff is in there is because we don't want to change the flavor of Mother Goddess.
Yeah. Agreed. And I mean, I think a lot of it too with the ice was like, Faust is crazy. How do you stop Faust?
Yeah.
Well, just don't play with ice. So, and it was like, will that work? Can you actually get away with this? Turns out you can in this deck. You can absolutely get away with barely any ice.
So, just to touch on the other ones that you'll see in normal IG or Jiteki, Cortex Lock, Kumanu. Most people now is playing one copy of the Swordsman, but I mean, it's good because it stops. It's Faust protection, but we're not really looking at that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, like, we don't mind if you're going to Faust through it because you're still losing cards from your
Yeah,
hand.
and that was the whole mentality of using Mother Goddess again, is because if you double stack those and they really want in there, that's a lot of cards to discard against a kill faction. Yagura was another card that most people like to put in there. its ability to do one net damage and to cycle R&D, if not broken, is really good in, like I say, in any other style except for what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And all those are great pieces of advice. And I've seen IG builds that kind of use variations of those. I mean, you're more than welcome to try it if you're not so bold. But I think this build that we've got going on is one of the best routes to set the ice configuration up.
Some of you might be asking about Kitsune. It is an ice mythic trap, but then again, we're trying to utilize our space in HQ to kind of hide our agendas, so it doesn't make sense. And then plus, it's a trash after it's used, so it's a one-time pop and could be gone. And what's the point? You're not taxing anything. You haven't set up any kill.
Yeah, and they can always like jack out after you hit them with it. So you give them the snare, and then they can be like, okay, I'm done with the run. Well, that may not be bad if you're trying to stall them out, but a lot of times, like, you want that false sense of security, right? You want to invite them in, you want to let them access a bunch of stuff, and you're just hoping that they're going to run into a lot of stuff. It's not bad. It's definitely a card that was considered and we talked about. Just ultimately it didn't make the cut, and I think a lot of it was because of the trash effect.
And I mean, a lot of you guys are going to think it's pretty crazy running this low of ice, but the thing is that if the more ice you put in, the less of the other stuff you can fit in. You know, it's like that scale, that give and the take. Yeah, we would love to have certain kill pieces of ice in there, but the thing is that then what do you pull out? All these other assets are the mind game that is Jinteki. So
yeah. And I said, and a big thing, if you've not played a deck like this before, odds are high. Definitely, like after you watch this video, like you should try it or play against it, or play it, and then it'll make a lot more sense, especially if this is the first time you've seen something like this, and you're like, you guys are crazy. How are you getting away with 3 pieces of ice? Surprisingly, it works better than you might think. So definitely try it.
One major standout that you might see is the Shikyu. We're not including Shikyu. I know in other builds, like the Worlds build, Chris was very adamant about saying that this was his linchpin of the deck. It did the most work for him. During some testings and things like that, and because of the choices we've made, I don't see that in this build. It hasn't been favorable for us. If you look at what Shikyu does, the runner must either take X amount of net damage or add Shikyu to his score agenda worth 1 agenda point. No matter what you do, they're always going to, I feel, going to take the -1, and it's just going to cost you money that you don't want to be paying out, right? Someone has 5 cards in their hand, and you're like, I'm going to pay 5 credits. You think they're going to say, oh, I'll take the 5 net damage,
Yeah.
It's very, very rare.
Yeah, and there's always that philosophy or the idea of you just pay 1, right? You're just using it to prick them for 1 more with the shocks. But it's still costing you money every single time they check it. And until you start getting the econ engine and stuff rolled up, you have to pay attention and be aware of the amount of credits you have. And honestly, having to throw that out or whatever sometimes is a problem. And another big thing that I always gripe about GQ, and I believe it's been a bit since I played with it, it does not fire from R&D.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
That's a showstopper. That is not. I gotta have it hurt from all angles. I can't deal with it.
Good point on that one too, because I've had it pulled from R&D right away, and they're like,
right, yeah, and then you're just like, oh, cool. Yeah. But I mean, if you're going with the Philotic kill option, I definitely see why he liked the card, because the idea is they take it, they load it up, and then you're adding a bunch of other agendas for the Philotic kill. And for that purpose, it's great.
Yeah, because
Um,
in his build also he always he explains it as it's mitigating the 3 point agendas. So they'd have to try and steal that extra agenda
mhm.
to make up for it. So in that build, it does have its piece and its fit, but it doesn't have any ebb and flow in this style that we've put together here.
Yeah, and another kind of point against it, um, and I think this comes to with like news teams becoming prevalent and being a problem, is you're seeing more people play with counters for these negative agendas. Um, I'm not saying you see data dealer all over the place, but definitely with things like artist colony.
Yeah,
You're seeing a lot of decks with that, and you definitely don't want to feed them the ability to tutor for exactly what they need to help out. And so that stuff's starting to see more play. And so in that case, if you find a player who has that, they're just like, sure, I'll take it as a -1 agenda, and then they sack it to something, and it ends up helping them more than hurting them.
some other ones is the allow repression. This one here would have probably been something to look at if there wasn't already enough ways to cycle cards.
Hmm.
It just doesn't have a fit right now. Um,
The I think my only thing that I've saw that I would even consider at this point now is if you had a really good setup on the museums and you wanted to wait at like the end of the runner's turn to pitch agenda flood and then shuffle them back into the museums. But you're trying to hold them at HQ, right? If you get the lock on HQ, you don't really want to pitch these. So it's a great card. I vouched for Lel when we did her faction breakdown, and I think it's still a good card. It just doesn't. There's too many better options. It just doesn't make the cut. It's it's like the 56th card. It's not quite 55th.
June bugs. You're looking at an asset trap deck, and we leave out their core staple.
Yeah.
Um, it's just
It's
it.
more net damage, right? And I
Yeah,
think the idea is you use Cerebrals as that trap, and then even with the contract killer, so you have all flavors of damage, and you have it all represented.
yeah. The cerebrals are a definite bonus over this. Obviously, they cost a little more, so you have to you know money manage money manage a little better. But in the long run, affecting their hand size is only the win-win for you with the brain damage. Um, you know, at the end of the day, something's got to give, and it was the June bug. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, if we didn't have the other advanceable traps, then June bug would be in there as like this is our only option thing. But when it comes to the damage, it's just better elsewhere.
yeah, agree.
Um, Looking, where is she? There it is, Tiny Giraffe, Celebrity Gift.
You
I
don't.
think,
Yeah, it's if you've. We don't want to show the hand. I mean,
yeah,
that's the biggest thing, right? The
yeah.
econ comes from assets.
Bottom line, yeah, we don't want to give away stuff. Um, the non-inclusion of Philotic.
Hmm.
Um, it it just doesn't fit to the agenda suite. Is the bottom line there?
Yeah, agree.
We don't want to add more agenda points. The Fetals do more for you other than this one card, because if it's stolen early, there's no reward for it at all.
Yeah, and it doesn't punish the runner.
Yeah,
Well, the fetals, at least you're punishing them in some way. Um, and also, playing with Philotic may trick you into trying to score agendas. Don't do that. keep your eye on the prize. Yeah.
the other big guy. Let me see if I can find him here. Is the hedge funds,
Hmm.
the non-inclusion of um, the Corp's staple money card. It just we're making enough money elsewhere. Ah, there she is.
Yeah, between the Turtlebacks diversified, and then the awesome Melange mining cores, you've got a lot of ways to do like pretty like steady econ or burst econ that's cheaper for you to fire up than hedge fund. Because that's the problem with hedge fund, right? If you get hit with a siphon and they take all your money,
Yeah,
you're like,
it's hard to dig out of that hole.
yeah, and you end up with like a card that's stuck in your hand. Well, a lot of these other options you can come at from a low point, like diversified, one credit diversified. Melange, if they leave you with one credit and they don't know you have a melange on the table, boom, you're back up 7 credits.
Yeah, and it's that swing because of the low ice count that we're using that obviously you have to be prepared for someone to just keep siphoning you. Um,
And that's where, if that's big in your meta, and again, we talked about this earlier, sealed vault could be an option. Also, though, be aware of the assets you have on the table. I find myself, if I don't have a sealed vault and I'm worried about a siphon early, like this is where hostiles are amazing. Again, well, it's a good card, but pay attention to the amount of money and assets you have, because sometimes they can do the siphon and you just dump all your money, just res your assets, and they don't get any money. They'll probably take an access, and sometimes that's terrible for them because they'll either get junk or they could hit a shock or they could hit a fetal. Um, it's so be mindful of that because you have ways you can play around things like siphon. Um, and that's one of the best ways to do it. I find it's really awesome just to have them play it and then just dump all your money, and it's like, cool, I've rezzed all this stuff, and you at least don't make a ton of credits off of my credits.
the other notable loss is archive memories. This is one of the cards that we were talking about before, to how to get the killer into your deck. This was cut. I wasn't really a fan of it before, and I was testing a lot without it. Cory, you had it in yours, but I think what led to an easier removal of this is the cards like Temple and
The museum.
the museum, because then we're playing that shuffle game.
Yeah. Museum made it an easier cut. And I think initially we were doing 3 overwriters, 1 archive, and then when the museums came out, we dropped 1 overwriter, 1 archive, and I fit the contract killer in. and now, and I guess to explain that card a little bit better, like why the contract killer? I love this card because it's another threat other than Ronin to deal damage. It also has the amazing utility of you can theoretically fire it from a blind install, so you can hide it with like your snares and your psychic fields. But it gives you a way to deal with Katie and Film Critic, which can both be problems against this deck. Because if you can take out that stable econ for the runner with Katie, the runner has a harder time being able to consistently trash your assets. And it's every time you can kill a Film Critic. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that it adds, like you said before, the robustness of the type of damage that's in there. I mean, obviously it's 2 meat damage, but not a lot of people are going to be prepared for some meat damage out of Jinteki. There was some IG decks going around that were using Scorched, but that's just that's a lot more commitment to
that's a
kill.
completely different deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cool thing about this, and I know some people will be like, oh, it's 1 contract killer, but the thing is about this deck, like, what is old can be new again, thanks to Museum of Histories and Jacksons and stuff like that. So a lot of times if you think like, oh, I'll fire this contract killer, it goes in the deck, and then if they don't deal with the museums, you just shuffle it right back and just wait for them to come back out. Like, museums are just insanely good cards that if the runner doesn't consistently deal with them, can just make things last forever. And it's a lot harder for the runner to deal with them because sometimes it's like, oh, it's 3, I'll just run and trash it. But if you've got cards in archives where they're costing like 5 or 6, and you have like a hostile res where it's like, hey, you can pay a chunk of your money, take a net. It's not so easy for the runner to just take those things off the table.
Another card that got left out was the Cyberdex Virus Suite. I
Hmm.
I would, I'd like to have one in there, but it's just,
It's hard. Deck
yeah,
space. That's
yeah.
probably the fifth. That's probably 55th. That's the 55th card.
And that's
Uh,
just because dealing with a couple of our arch nemesises like Medium and Imp.
yeah, Imp. And I'm sure somewhere in this conversation, people watching are like, "Well, how do you deal with Imp?" And really, the best answer is you purge.
Yeah,
Like you just have to suck it up. They play the Imp.
purging
They
for
get
one token.
yeah, but a lot of times it's worth it. I mean, it seems like it's not, but it is because it's a and I would like to try to find a way to get that CVS in there at some point, but it is. It's just there's not anything right now that I see we can cut, and you just have to play around it.
Yeah,
Medium is the other one that was mentioned, and that can be a problem, but that's a bold move, right? So
yeah.
sometimes it pays out for you, and sometimes it pays out for the runner, and at that chance, it's just the roll of the dice. And I think if you're playing with like a Hokusai on R&D, you take the gamble, right? You just see if they run into a bunch of bad things in R&D, or they may get lucky and just roll into all the agendas they need.
Yeah. And then the last notable exclusions are currents. Cerebral static right now is I feel is a really strong one, and I've tried a couple different things to try and get it in there. I've been fighting the current fight
Yeah,
because right now there's a lot of runners out there that rely on their ability, and if you're able to blank that, it's a significant tempo change to the game.
yeah. And that's another one that like we've talked about. If and I think that card is a strong consideration for your deck if you have a lot of employee strike runners.
Hmm.
Because since you're not trying to score agendas, that's the only way you can get rid of it. And I think that's a meta call. And maybe you could cut down on like one heritage committee, or you could cut down on like one psychic field or something like that and fit in a static. That's an option. But I think that goes in line with like the sealed vault blacklist. It's a meta call, or it's a way for you to kind of vary it and play your own little style on it.
So those are the excludes. Now talking about mulligan strategy here, Corey, what do you like to see in your opening hand?
So I love to see, of course, like any traps from hand. So like snare's great. It's okay. You don't want to see too many of them though. But I love to see like turtlebacks,
Mhm.
melange, hostile infrastructure is one of my favorite cards to see early game. Just because, especially if you're worried about siphon, as I mentioned earlier, it's got its own built-in siphon protection. So yeah, and that's a Hokusai, and like those are great. So that kind of covers you. You get a little bit of econ, and you can start building your asset chain. Of course, you see a piece of ice because you've only got three. So if you see one in your opening hand, that's great.
Yeah.
But sometimes I tend to like the ice to come later because it gives you time to analyze the habits of the runner. Because you can look and see like what servers are they checking more often, how often are they checking, which servers are they building up multi-access. And so I think if you can see the ice later, that's better for you to make a good decision on where you place it. But yeah, that's usually what I like to see early. Museums are never bad, but I will say, and definitely from like watching you play games and stuff like that, you don't always want to res your museums too early. And I think it's better sometimes to leave them face
Hmm.
down until you absolutely need them. Because if you make them targets too early in the game, you're just going to lose them without having a steady way to recur them. And sometimes it's better to have one museum online, and then when they come and trash it, nothing annoys the runner more than them coming and paying and trashing the museum, and then at the end of the turn, you're like, all right, I'll res this museum and shuffle this museum back in the
Back in,
deck.
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
And so that's like a big thing as far as like the strategy for playing the deck. But yeah, I mean, what do you tend to like in your opening hands? What tends to be your favorite?
So first off, when you're looking at an opening hand for this deck, I want to stress that it's not important, or it's not diehard to try and turn IG's ability on right away.
Yes, absolutely agree.
What a lot of people think that, okay, I'm playing IG, I'm going to put down maybe this asset over here, and I'm going to then draw up. So then now I have to discard a couple cards, and the trash value is up. And that shouldn't be your priority out the gate. Look at that as that's a bonus that's going to aid in this deck as it gets up. I have no problem. I love seeing a hostile infrastructure early, or I love seeing even a psychic field
Yeah, that's
early,
another really good one early.
because those are assets that I can put out right away. And if if I put a hostile infrastructure on the board and they want to run it on their next turn right away and trash it, okay, you
Yeah,
know,
cool.
right? Because like looking at it here, I won't even spend my money sometimes to res it just to do the one net damage, right? That it's going to
Hmm.
occur. That's 5 right out the gate with nothing even pumping its like the IG ability. That's
Yeah,
that's possibly wiping their credit pool down if they haven't sure gambled or done
yeah.
something.
And you mentioned like a really good point too on especially with hostiles of being mindful of when to res. And it's true. It's not always the right answer to always res them when they're going for assets. Being patient on those hostiles and paying attention to your credits and knowing when's a good time, like you have the surplus to keep it resed, is a good part of playing the deck correctly.
Yeah, there's don't be in a rush to res up all your stuff. A face down card in Jinteki is sometimes more dangerous than doing 1 or 2 net damage. But having, like I said, psychic field or a hostile, so be it. Sometimes you might even want to just put a Ronin out turn 1 and,
Hmm.
and not advance it. Like don't put the money into it just to see what they're going to do. Like use that first turn to see like, oh, is this the kind of player that's going to run everything I put face down? Because then you'll have to adjust your strategy a little bit,
Hmm.
because you'll want to, not waste money advancing things if you know that it's going to be killed off right away. You'll want to then try and build your IG power up. But like I said, I love seeing the psychic fields. I love seeing the hostile. Obviously, I like seeing shock because I want to charge the archives early. I'm not worried about seeing one agenda. Like, don't be the kind of person that's like, I have one agenda in my hand. Man, I really have to mulligan that away because I don't want to start with an agenda.
Right.
Our agendas have built, like, other than the global food, it has built-in protection.
Mhm. And especially if you have one in hand, the Jinteki HQ is not something a lot of people like multi-accessing against
Hmm.
because a lot of runners will assume like, oh, you've got probably like a shock or a snare in there, so they're going to be careful about checking it. So 1 in 5 isn't bad.
Yeah,
No.
and then like you said, Turtlebacks is a great first turn
Hmm.
install because that's going to set you up for money for the next ones. And then yes, obviously the a mother goddess that I can slap in front of HQ right away
Yeah,
is beautiful.
yeah, cool. And I mean,
Oh,
and a big
and
thing.
sorry, also Heritage Committee.
Oh
That
yeah,
card
yeah, yeah.
that card can come any time of the game, and it's great.
Yeah, and that's one of those that's a way you can start to fuel the archives. And I absolutely will agree with don't be in a rush to overdraw and pitch in archives. Like that part of the game will happen. It'll come as you're playing the game. So don't be in a hurry to just draw a bunch of cards and bend them to do the turn on the ability. And another thing too is trying to. It's always good to try to find a balance. And a lot of people who've played a lot of IG will let you know sometimes it's better to leave it at like 2 or 3 cards, as opposed to going crazy and just
Mm,
like flooding it. Because then you make that number where the runner's like, oh well, I'm definitely going to run this, and flip them over. Like if you keep it where just enough where it's like, do I really want to run and take like 2 to 3 net damage from shocks to save myself like 1 or 2 credits? And
yeah.
you put that real tough decision on the runner.
Another playstyle tactic to touch on is that if at any point you need to pitch an agenda to archives, what you're going to want to look for is the global foods. It's easier to get those back in
Hmm.
than and to keep the future perfects in your hand
Yeah.
rather
Now,
than flip the futures.
now, I will say this is a caveat though. If you have like Jackson, right? If Jackson's your way, you're putting it back in. I think the global food is the right answer.
Yeah.
If you're going to try to rely on taking the gamble and see if you can get it in with the museum, then Future Perfect is probably the better call. But
Right, right.
ideally, you want to purge the global foods out of your hand because it's the one agenda they can take with no penalty. And sometimes Future Perfect's not bad to have in archives if you have 2 or 3 shocks sitting there,
That's true.
because then you're making the runner play the game. Like if they lose the first time, they're like, ah, do I really want to try this again? And if I fail, I take like even if you succeed, you're taking another 2 to 3 net every time you try to grab it. And sometimes like that's worth doing for the experience. Just the social experiment of watching the runner. How often are they? It's like when the mouse is like getting shocked or whatever, trying to do it. Yeah, yeah,
And then obviously, for play styles, use your own judgment on the side games. We're not going to tell you what our side game play style
patents
is.
are right. We all have different angles on this. Yeah,
So play that as you will.
yeah,
So that's pretty much the mulligan.
yeah.
There's cards in there that everything else can come later, but those are the ones that I like to see off the top.
Hmm.
Matchup guides. Let's start with the most predominant one is Anarch that you will
Yeah,
probably be seeing. Anarch can be a little bit painful because you need a little bit of setup. Number one, if you're playing Wizard, like we said, some of this might be repeat from the conversations, but we just like to recap it here. Anarch, if you're playing Wizard, ditch Chairman Hiro as quickly as you can in the archives, just because he's got that extra credits. It's an easier agenda score.
yeah.
I wouldn't try and get too greedy with him out on the field
Mhm.
because Wizard players love to just run things because they feel they can.
Yeah, and that's where it's important to know your local Wizard player. So that's where you play those blind installs and you see, do they check it? You do like the Mushin, see what they do. Um, Sometimes Wizard players are the easiest to pull into a Cerebral because they like to check stuff.
Mm,
So you just have to pay attention to their mannerisms to try to figure out what they're going to check.
right.
A lot of times they may ignore your remotes and just use those credits to keep ripping stuff out of R&D.
Yeah.
But
Mushin, a
that,
psychic field, is a nice play against a Wizard
oh
player
yeah,
too.
yeah. And hostiles are really solid versus those. But again, don't res them too early because at that point in the game, it's probably real easy for them just to go and get it, and you don't have enough defenses set up.
Yeah. And then, like we said, you have the keyhole and defense with the Hokusais, and you have the eater defense with by not putting something over your
Archives, yeah.
archives right away.
Um,
And the hostiles will help you with keyholes as well there.
Yeah. So like a big thing in Wizard, yeah, it's gonna suck easy with all that free money to rip into your assets. But again, like 1 or 2 face down cards in archives and you're getting close to blanking his ability. So just kind of be mindful of that and just pay attention to what they're checking and how often they're checking.
And remember too that if you're playing the most common Wizard right now, a good portion of that deck is going to do nothing against yours.
Yeah. A lot of decks will be
There is no piece of cutlery that will trash your mother goddess.
Yeah. The only card that you need to be worried about getting rid of it is Parasite. But then again, like you can time the Parasite kill with hostiles to be more destructive to the runner than it is beneficial. And also, you just have to pay attention. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And those matchups, you have to be aware and follow kind of what's going on. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
and then obviously the mother goddess is if you can double stack them, you know, it won't just be for Anarch because the card is everywhere. That's your Faust protection. So
Yeah, so that way if they kill one, you've got another as backup. And the cool thing about it too, right? If you're running so much recursion, you can usually they kill it, you just put it right back in the deck, and then just hopefully it comes up again. Just reinstall it. And this can help a bunch too, like in your build where you're running Blacklist. You can lock down some of the instant like snapback with the Parasite. Like they go to run into the Mother Goddess, and you're just like, oh, well, I'll res this, and now it's a problem.
yeah, and that's you know transitioning.
Well, I
Do
guess
you,
you're going to go over a couple other anarchs,
yeah,
right? I
sorry,
mean,
got
yeah,
excited.
yeah, I know. There are other anarchs. Max, big thing about her to keep in mind is you're either going to get siphoned or you're going to get keyholed. It's a lot of times what I've always experienced. I would prefer to say you want to defend versus the keyhole more than the siphon. In that respect, you want to be careful of watching. You want to watch R&D a lot more because they're not going to be accessing the cards. So just play that a lot. You know, you can't guard all of it, and a lot of times you have better protection. I feel like set up to take the siphon, but you have to kind of you have to play with the ebb and flow of that match.
Yeah, I'd rather get siphoned than
Just
repeatedly
keyhold over and over again,
keyhold.
especially early game because they will usually always go for it if you leave it open. Noise. Noise is an interesting matchup. So I would tend to say so. Imp, of course, is going to be a pain in the ass. You're going to see all the time. Again, you purge. You always purge. um, but keep in mind his ability fuels yours. So as he's milling cards off the top of the deck, he's increasing the trash cost of all your stuff. And your agenda density is really low. And you have tons of ways to shuffle stuff back in. So if he's not constantly checking archives, and you can keep like one museum active or have a Jackson down, you can keep throwing stuff back in. You just want to pay attention to the amount of credits they have and always know that the shard can be a threat. So don't get too cocky about pitching tons of stuff with the agendas he's milling if you're worried about him hitting you with that. And then Val, blackmail. Okay. And DLR builds, if those are still a thing in anyone's meta, you have so much recursion if you can get the museums online that you're just kind of staring at each other if they're just going to DLR and then you just shuffle the cards right back in. It is important to note, though, that bad pub works as like a pseudo wizard, so that they can trash things a little easier if she's running, and she has 50 cards in her deck, so she can usually last a little bit longer if you're just trying to burn her out. But you don't really have to worry about blackmails, so that's not a thing. Yeah.
That's probably the gist of those guys, right?
Yeah, and I think between all of those, I mean, I've played against all those builds, and me personally, I think the max is probably the hardest for me.
And just
I,
cautious of the apocalypse in Max.
yeah, and that's again, I preach the hostile helps out a ton, but I think between those, I think that's probably the hardest of the matchups because she has natural card draw built in. Granted, she's milling herself out, so she puts a timer herself on the game, and if you're causing consistent net damage, then sometimes it can be good, right, for you to hit those I've had worse, because it's bursting more cards into her hand, and it's putting the pressure of having the levy early. And if you are playing with things like Blacklist and you have a way of locking them out, like you can, you put more pressure on Max to run more often, causing them to make mistakes or hit traps and stuff like that.
Yeah. Shaper, in Shapers, always going to have its funky recursion and stuff. Blacklist comes in handy for me there.
Yeah.
Force them to go get it.
So,
Shaper's going to be your R&D, so watch your
yeah, watch the
watch
RP.
your R&D a little closer.
And you'll see Kate. I know Haley's been popping up a bunch. That's been gaining a lot of steam. Both of them use tricks, right? A lot of them, some of them cut Parasite because they can't afford it, and that's great for you. And a lot of them, I know, like some of the stealth rig Kates, a lot of them have been cutting Hockman, which gives you the luxury of turning a server off
Yeah.
if you get that Mother Goddess up. And a big thing, I mean, and some of the things about Shaper decks, if they're not familiar, and this is actually, yeah, this is pretty much like Shaper and Criminal, we'll get to. A lot of these decks, if they're not familiar with how your deck plays, they may build a rig. They may start rig building in preparation or wanting to get the cards out of their hand.
So they don't lose it to the net damage, right?
Right.
So,
And, that's great time for you because, you don't care about their rig. Things to be mindful in Shaper. So currently right now, really none of them are slotting net damage protection. This is kind of like a great time to be a Jinteki player because everyone's prepping for ETF and they're playing against like different flavors of NBN that they're worried about the fast advance and they're worried about the Glacier build that they're not building in protection for net. So you're less likely to see feedback filters, net shields, things like that. And I don't even stress if I see a feedback filter because a lot of times you can tax them on money so hard that you can usually kill them through feedback filters just because they're spending so much money to try to gain any ground against your deck. It's not something I usually stress about.
Be wary of your killer. Your contract killer is there. Most of them might have the one copy of the film critic.
Yeah, you want to be aware of that.
So feel free to pop
right.
pop that critic.
Yeah, and that's was one of those moments. And like they're always running Katie too.
Yeah.
And there's always that fun feeling of like 9 credits on Katie. Yes, and then you just shoot it.
Criminal is going to be a little bit different. The stealth Andes, really, they're going to do the same thing as what you were saying previous. Is they're going to start building a rig and allows you a window to open up.
And just expect to get siphoned.
Yeah, expect siphon. The other thing that you're really going to have no control over is I don't know how it is down where you are, but Bank Job is kind of making a little bit of a return.
Yeah, it's still there. Not every criminal deck is running it, but it's still in some of them I've seen. But yeah, if you can find ways to mitigate Siphon through like Sealed Vault or Rezzing, you can slow them down money. But it's very important in the criminal matchup to pay attention to how much credits criminals are sitting on. So they'll probably go up early in a huge like econ burst. But a big thing about criminal is it's hard for them to sustain it. Now you'll probably get the Desperado security testing, which is fine. That's what criminals do, right?
You can't avoid that because we're assets and we're playing so horizontal. What can you do?
But look at the good news. They're always making your run every turn. So you could pretty much neural whenever you're ready. So you just have to watch those things. Inside job. Be aware of that. So don't get too cocky with your Mother Goddess if you're taking your eye off the prize and you're trying to score out of that remote.
And watch. I know we said stuff about res timing. Watch if you're playing against Leela. Know that if there is a piece that you do need, if you're really hoping to get those museums online, be wary if you're holding a hand of agendas.
Yeah.
because you don't want them bounce
Yeah.
back.
Right. And then pay attention to like the turn, like the part of the turn where they do the run, right? So if it's like click 3 and they don't have a lot of money, or for some reason they're crazy and they run on click 4, then you can pay attention when like the res stuff so it doesn't get bounced if legally hits. Lucky for us, we have low agenda density, so it's hard for her to get those bounces, ideally. But do be mindful if you've got a bunch of advanced traps down and she hits that, one of those is most likely coming back to your hand.
Right. Other than that, I think that's the gist of what you should be seeing out there.
Yeah, and usually with like the matchups, right? Anarch is maybe your hardest. I don't, I don't know. Like, I think if Shaper, because they focus on multi-access and R&D, I don't know. Criminal is usually your easiest matchup between the three main factions, and then I don't think you have like an immensely bad matchup, except Apex. Uh, if they drop a heartbeat on you, you can just scoop, start packing your deck up, and go ahead and switch sides. Uh,
But lucky that's few and far between, though.
yeah, you could actually play through it. It's very hard, but that's your most feared card is when that gets played. You're like, seriously, good game.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then the other ones are going to play the same style. Adam and Sunny, rig building, different things, blah blah
yeah,
blah. You're
yeah.
good.
Except in your case, like Adam has to run, right? Which
Yeah.
is what you. That's the most exciting thing ever. You're just like, oh, he has to check something every turn. So
So that's it. Usually during these deck builds, I like to talk about flex spots, but we kind of touched on that throughout.
yeah,
The blacklist or sealed vault is flex there.
cerebral static could potentially be a thing to
Yeah,
consider. Again, if employee strike, I do want to bring up a special mention if you have hacktivist, right? Because some people are like, "Oh, hacktivist sucks because you have all
yeah,
these assets," and I would argue, nay, hacktivist can be glorious if you don't have a lot of things you care about in your hand, and they build up just enough credits to run and trash an asset. And it's really funny that they run and you're just like, "I'll res this, trash a card face down, it costs one more," and then they're like, "Oh, cool, I don't have enough money now." It's almost like the trolly nature of the deck sometimes that can frustrate them. So sometimes like hacktivists can be great for you. It just depends on what your HQ is at that moment, right? I
yeah.
mean, I think that's how it is for everybody, but pay attention to that because sometimes you can use that to your advantage to fuel your ID ability and or to mess up their math when they're coming in to take something out.
Some interesting future, like we'll keep this build up to date. This is a build that both Cory and I have you know good comfort level with, and it's exciting and interesting to play. This will change over the course of the cycle, so we'll keep this updated and we'll come back when there's some significant changes to it. One of the spoilers we can point out here, you can see the Mumbad Virtual Tour. You're looking at a 0 to 5. If the runner accesses Mumbad Virtual Tour while it is installed, they must trash it. So it's almost like a little reverse siphoning kind of thing there.
Right.
So that could play into it. It's going to take some
Eh,
testing to see what we can cut, but
Yeah, but it seems to play really well with taxing the runner more, and if you have hostiles online, they have to trash it and take the net damage from the hostiles. So that seems like a great one. Um, Another one to mention that's coming out in Business First is Product Recall. Is an interesting option for Econ, but I don't know if it makes the cut in this build yet. And that's the one that's like a zero cost operation, trash an asset or upgrade, and gain credits equal to its trash cost. Important to note, it's not printed trash cost. So if you have some of these assets that are like 5 to trash and you have 3 or 4, it's just like gain 8 credits. Um, and then you can just shuffle it back into museum history. But so those are potential, but I feel like right now Diversified has been doing enough work along with the other econ options we have that I don't feel currently it's necessary to slot the influence or to trigger the alliance if it is an alliance card.
Well, I think that's pretty much the rundown here for this deck. Again, thanks very much. You know, if you are a Patreon subscriber and you saw this early, thanks again for your contribution. If you guys have any questions, drop some comments below, and you know, tune in for
Whatever next
yeah.
next project we work on. And I will say, definitely, play it. Try the deck out. Feel free to leave comments with questions if you run into bad matchups. Like, how do I deal with this? Or maybe you might have some really cool like feedback options, something that ends up working really good in your area. It would be really cool, like to talk it out and see what you come up with or what works or doesn't work for you.
No doubt. All right, guys. Well, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this deck guide walkthrough as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you. We'll catch you all later.